Our first presenter, who is to my right, is the Dean of Armenian Studies in America, Nina Garsoïan, Gevork Avedissian Professor Emerita of Armenian History and Civilization at Columbia University, and director of the major publication on Armenian culture, the Revue des études arméniennes. Throughout her career and her very many publications, she has led in the careful exploration of the history of Armenia and the consideration of how its events affected the formation of the character of the Armenian people. I've had the honor of studying with Professor Garsoïan, and I hope that you will join me in welcoming her for her talk today, Early Medieval Armenian History.
Thank you. When Mrs. Evans did me the honor of asking me to speak on this day devoted to the Armenians, I was faced with something of a dilemma. I could, as a medievalist, choose the easier path and give a brief description of Armenia in the Middle Ages as a profoundly Christian society, yet one of Iranian type. And there is no doubt that much could and already has been said about this. The 5th century, first identified in the 19th century as a golden age by the Vienna militarists, boasted the remarkably rapid development of a major native literature in the century following the creation of the Armenian alphabet by Mashtots at the beginning of the same century. Before the end of it, the traditional account of the Christianization of Northern Armenian Kingdom by the so-called Agatageos, the biography of Saint Mashtots by his disciple Koryun, the anonymous epic histories of Byzantaran, long misattributed to Pavstos Byzant, otherwise unknown, and at the turn into the next century, the history of Armenia of Khazar Parpetsi, had already laid the ground for what would be one of the major genres of medieval Armenia. Other brilliant periods, such as the Bagratid kingdoms of northern Armenia and the Atsrunids of southern Osmaragan, and the subsequent Cilician kingdom, unquestionably deserve the attention that they have already received. But the hop, skip, and jump approach to Armenian history, beginning with the 5th century Arsacid kingdom, then the Bagratid period after a hiatus of some 4.5 centuries, and thence after less than 2 centuries to Cilicia, outside the Armenian plateau, there's little to explain the survival of the Armenians over more than 2 millennia, when contemporary societies, to mention only the Roman Empire, now exist only in history books. It does little to explain why natives from Tarsus in Cilicia and Sivas or Caesarea in Central Asia Minor both consider themselves Armenians. Why, if you will forgive a brief intrusion of autobiography, my father's family, who seem to have been in the Georgian capital of Tiflis since the 13th century, and my mother's family in distant Moscow, where Armenian had not been spoken for 3 generations and who were completely integrated into Russian culture, nonetheless had no hesitation to identify themselves as Armenians. And so I decided to choose a more difficult path, to try to present to you a different approach, namely to try to define the constants laid down in the medieval period which have ensured the otherwise inexplicable survival and have made of Armenia, until the present time, an almost unique example of a nation without a state. To do this, I will defy tradition, by not concentrating on the early Christian Golden Age or on the revival of the Armenian monarchy by the Bagratids at the end of the 9th century, but rather on the intervening period between them, which has hitherto found little favor with historians and has usually been dismissed as the Dark Ages, but to which I propose to give the name of the interregnum. To be sure, some of the concepts at the base of Armenia's troubled history cannot be ascribed to a particular period, but underlies all of them. Primary, though often disregarded, is the mountainous nature of Armenia, with the main mountain chain running mostly north, or rather south to north, across the plateau to culminate in Mount Ararat, and which separates the Araxin north from the Vatic south, subdividing it into two distant portions, and then subdivided into a series of separate regions isolated from each other for much of the year by the rigorous climate. The mountain passes close with snow usually from October until at least May. This fragmentation resulted in the double orientation of early Armenian Christianity, the south influenced by the tradition of Antioch in Syria and Edessa in Mesopotamia, center on the Ashdishat of Taron, west of Lake Van, where the epic histories affirm that the first and mother church of Armenia was founded, and I quote, "the first and most foremost and place of honor, for it was there that the Holy Church was built for the first time and an altar raised in the name of the Lord," unquote. From the north, to which, according to the account of Agathageros, St. Gregory the Illuminator had brought from the west the Hellenized Christianity of Anatolian Cappadocia. This north-south division lingered for centuries in the developing Armenian church and would manifest itself anew in the simultaneous northern Bagratids and southern Artsrunid kingdoms of the later Middle Ages. The internal subdivisions of the two main areas led to the development of a powerful nexus of unruly princely clans. There's no doubt that this centrifugal aspect of the Armenian plateau defied all attempts at centralization. From the beginning, the Armenian king, who was directly only the lord of the central district of Ararat, was only the first among his equals. As such, the geographic fragmentation of historic Armenia obviously was a constant element of weakness for the creation of a centralized state. Yet at the same time, it permitted the survival of a powerful aristocratic society inherited from neighboring Persia rather than from the urban tradition of the Mediterranean world, an aristocracy dedicated to its hereditary rights, offices, and estates, which could be reconstituted if but one male child of a particular clan survived its destruction. Such a social pattern also offered an ultimate resistance to foreign conquest, since the invaders were constrained to piecemeal conquest of the land rather than to a single victory, and it permitted the survival of the nation for centuries despite the absence of a central government, for which Razak Parpesi already said that the Armenian princes could found unnecessary at the end of the 5th century. Counterbalancing the scattering effect of the geographical setting were several unifying elements, of which the first, unquestionably, was a common language and literature. I already said that from the creation of the Armenian alphabet sprang up almost immediately a vigorous intellectual and literary tradition, unhindered, as we shall see, by political vicissitudes.